Hey everyone, I'm Brad and this is Watch Rate Heart, and it's Friday, which means it's time for the watch list, where I discuss the films I've watched and my feelings about them. And this week is the final week of reviews for 2025. And there's only one appropriate way to end the year, and that is with films that are set during or revolve around Christmas. And it's a theme that I would call season screenings. That's right, we have 4 films that are centered around or set in Christmas. So let's grab your eggnog, Christmas cookies, or whatever it is that you have, and let's start the final watch list of 2025.
What Jane Austen novels have you read?
None. I don't read novels. I prefer good literary criticism. That way you get both the novelist's idea as well as the critic's thinking. With fiction, I can never forget that none of it ever really happened, but it's all just made up by the author.
Let's begin with a film from a director I've been looking forward to watching for a while now, and that is Whit Stillman and his first film, Metropolitan. It has a Letterboxd score of 3.8 out of 5, a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93% fresh. It was nominated for 1 Oscar, and that was for Best Original Screenplay at the time it was released. I think it's a film that's got very witty and verbose dialogue. This is very much a talky film. Everything is done in dialogue, with a few exceptions in certain cases, but it's definitely a film that if you enjoy movies for their dialogue, this is probably something up your alley. And it's an interesting Jane Austen-like story that is more male-centric. That's another thing that I was actually quite surprised by, that I really enjoyed. I like stories from Jane Austen. I love Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and watching this film definitely gave me reminders of Jane Austen, and of course they reference it pretty boldly in the film as well. And I think the other thing that I like about this film, it gets the feel right of charming characters who are also insufferable and pretentious. This film feels like a proto-version of series like The White Lotus and Succession, where the whole thing is watching really rich and affluent people just be complete dumbasses and just be insufferable, but in a funny way. I don't think they're that insufferable like in Succession, but I definitely feel like Metropolitan has that kind of feel to it that other shows and movies have cribbed. So if you're into those shows and that concept specifically, I think you might actually very much enjoy this film. There's one issue I have. Even though the film is about less than 90 minutes, I think it's about 85 minutes long, it did feel like it dragged in certain parts, and that's usually not good if I'm sitting here watching the movie and I'm kind of glazing over going, oh boy, what's going on next? There's a part in the middle where I'm like, I wish they could wrap this up a little bit, but it's not terrible. I don't think cutting certain parts would have helped. That would have made this like a 70-minute film. I think if they would have taken some of the ancillary characters and combined them into something, or maybe take a couple characters and combine them into something else, into a different character, I think that would have really helped the film. But yeah, it's a minor quibble, but I had to admit there were times in the film where I was like, okay, can we start moving on, please? But I definitely enjoyed Metropolitan, and it's making me look forward to the other films that Whit Stillman has done. I'm going to give Metropolitan 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think it's very witty and funny. It's got really good dialogue. I also like that it's kind of like a weird Jane Austen-like novel, but that's more centered on men than women. I actually thought that was very interesting, but I also feel like this film did drag at a certain point. Overall, I'm going to give Metropolitan 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, in every watch list, I not only review films, I also get the reviews of people from the Letterboxd community. And let's start with Mia Lee Vaishano. Mia Lee gives it 3.5 stars out of 5, and she says, Jane Austen novel repurposed for New York yuppies or urban hot bourgeoisie, which I hated that term. It was so stupid. Right down to the eloquently structured dialogue and the delicious slow burn romance. But no Pride and Prejudice hand flex, though. Well, you can't have everything you want, I guess. Again, the film makes it plainly clear that they're referencing Jane Austen a lot. And I do agree with Mia here that it felt like a Jane Austen novel that was repurposed for that era. So, yeah, I definitely liked it. Let's get into the second review. This one is from Robert Dixon. Robert gives it 4 stars out of 5 with a heart, and Robert says, I found it somewhat difficult to digest while still thoroughly enjoying it. The way Metropolitan paints these characters so pathetically while they're having these meaningless conversations about their existence and how much self-worth they have. While there aren't really relatable characters, there are aspects of their personality and the decisions that they make that ground them more in humanity. Those are the most humorous aspects for me because they're all so unaware of their own situations. I think that last part is why a lot of people seem to gravitate towards these films and shows about rich people who are clueless dickheads, but are somehow kind of charming because you do relate to them in a certain aspect, but by their very nature, they're very unrelatable. And it's that weird dichotomy that makes those types of shows interesting and and engaging. So I definitely see what Robert is saying. This next review is from Alana. Alana gives it a heart and no rating. And Alana says, it's time for me to accept that pretentious people talking about pretentious things and occasionally feeling emotional is one of my favorite film genres. You know what? It's kind of my favorite genre too at certain points. I don't know if it's just laughing at them or finding like I said in the other review, finding a connection with them, even though I find them horribly unrelatable. But I have to agree with Alana too. It's slowly becoming one of my favorite types of shows and movies to watch. And this last review is from Travis. Travis gives us 4.5 stars out of 5. No heart, by the way. And he said, didn't actually watch it, but I read this great review and now it's one of my favorite movies. That's a very good reference to this movie. Hilarious. I've been wanting to watch Whit Stillman for a while, but I've heard how dry his sense of humor is. Even though I kind of like dry humor, sometimes dry humor in a movie can be too dry, but I definitely found myself really enjoying Metropolitan despite some quirks that it has. So that would probably lead me to watch Barcelona and The Last Days of Disco at some point. So definitely a good movie if you like witty and verbose dialogue. And like I said, if you watch shows like Succession and The White Lotus, and you find yourself enjoying them despite none of the characters being relatable at all, I think you might find your way to enjoy Metropolitan. So I'd say definitely check that out. The next film set in Christmas is Billy Wilder's Stalag 17, starring William Holden. This was recommended to me by Professor Dorkman. And remember, if you have a recommendation for me, you can leave it in the comments on my Letterboxd reviews or go to the comments section on YouTube. Thank you, Professor Dorkman. This has a Letterboxd score of 4.0 out of 5, a Rotten Tomatoes score of 91% fresh. This was nominated for 3 Oscars and won 1 for Best Actor for William Holden. I didn't love this film as much as Professor Dorkman did, but I did enjoy it in some aspects. I think the whole whodunit about the film as to who is the snitch in the barracks is probably the best part of the film, and it works very well. When the film sticks to that story, I think it's when it's its most compelling and it's at its most entertaining. And I think William Holden has a good performance in the film. With the way that the story is structured, he's more of a supporting performance. I don't really understand how he got a Best Actor win for this, but I do think it's a good performance for what it is. There's also scenes in the film that shows the mental state of all these soldiers that are in the barracks and that are in the POW camps. And I think they're well done in spots, especially towards the end when they're starting to crack a little bit, starting to realize what's going on. I think the showing of the fraying of their mental state, I think is actually very good in this. I definitely start to like and enjoy those parts of the film. And I think the emotionality of those scenes really work very well. What doesn't work well in this film for me, and this is just for me, is the comedy. It just did nothing for me at all. Stalag 17 is more of a comedy, I would say, than a drama. And for me, just the comedy fell completely flat. I think the comedy is mostly centered around 2 comic relief soldiers, which is Animal and Shapiro, and both I just found annoying. I did not like them at all. So when those soldiers are there and they're the center of the film, I kind of just trail off. I did not enjoy the comedic aspects at all in this film. Bearing that in mind, I think that the way that they melded the comedy and drama was good. I didn't think this was going to feel much like The Great Escape. But I think in ways The Great Escape is a better film, mainly because the comedy in that does work, and I just like the characters a lot more in that film. I like William Holden's character a bit in this film, but when it comes to the characters in The Great Escape, I actually like them a lot more. So they are kind of 2 different films in a way, but in a lot of ways they are alike. So even though the comedic parts of the film I just did not like, I think the drama was enough to sustain me for me to enjoy Stalag 17. So that's why I'm going to give the film 3 stars out of 5. Again, William Holden has a good performance in the film. I think when the film sticks to the mystery of who is the snitch and showing the mental state of the soldiers, I think that's where the film works well. I wouldn't mind some comic relief sprinkled in here and there, but I think if they would have kept it at the drama, it would have done a lot better for me. But since they went for a more comedic bent and the comedy did not work well for me, I think that's going to be a huge deterrent for me for giving it a bigger score. But overall, 3 stars out of 5 for me for Stalag 17. Let's get to Letterboxd reviews. We're going to start with the Letterboxd review from Professor Dorkman, who is the one who recommended this film. He gave it 5 stars out of 5 with a heart. Professor Dorkman says, this film contains everything you would expect, but doesn't rely on just one element to carry you into the climax. What Billy Wilder and his camera crew did to make each scene within a cramped camp space different and fresh should be studied. That's a good point. There is not a lot of locations in this film. It is a POW camp. So there's the barracks, there's the outside, and the commandant's office. And it does feel like it's shot differently in each scene. So he's got a point there. I will give him that. Each character is written as a person with their own shades of gray. This movie is overshadowed by Wilder's other films. Yeah, I didn't realize this was a Wilder film. Robert Strauss's Oscar-winning comedic performance is a little over the top. That could be chalked up to either the stage production or the 1953 comedic sensibilities. Did he win the Oscar? He might have been nominated. I thought he only got nominated. I thought Holden was the only one that won. I'll double check that, but I'm fairly certain. If I'm wrong, I will put something on the screen that will say that I was wrong. But yeah, again, thank you, Professor Dorkman, for recommending this. This was a good movie. I guess I just didn't have the same feeling that you had. Let's get to the next review, which is from Greg's 1999. Greg gives it 3.5 stars out of 5 with a heart. And Greg says, a pretty funny POW film. I was half expecting it to turn into The Great Escape. Same here. But it was more about uncovering a spy than trying to escape and making their most of their time in the camp. This also kind of reminded me of Cool Hand Luke in a way, but for those same reasons. But a third way in the film, I was like, this is just The Great Escape again. And then when it started going into the mystery of who the snitch is, then it was like, oh, okay, that's where they're going. I enjoyed the film. I just found none of the comedy to work for me, and usually that's a big problem, but the whodunit part is what really carried me. This next review is from Call's Apartment. Call's Apartment gives it 4 stars out of 5, and he says, Billy Wilder, that's the review. Yeah, he's a director that the more I watch his films, he just has a lot of quality stuff. Yeah, with the exception of The 7-Year Itch, which I just really did not like. I found that film just annoying. But yeah, Wilder has some really good stuff. Yeah, I have to admit that. And this last review is from Alpha Critic Reviews. Alpha Critic Reviews gives it 3 stars out of 5. And Alpha says, it's an amusing fusion of drama and comedy, and is a time capsule of the pro-America, post-World War II sentiment at that time. Additionally, one can definitely see how this movie was the precursor for shows like MASH or Hogan's Heroes, and that does make this film commendable. That's a good point, actually. I mean, I've only seen a couple of episodes of Hogan's Heroes. I've actually never seen the movie or the series of MASH. Ever at all. That is definitely something I'm going to have to find a way to watch at some point, which is the movie MASH. On a side note, William Holden once quipped that he believed his Oscar win for this movie was not deserved and was compensation for losing the Oscar in 1950 for Sunset Boulevard. I'm inclined to agree with that statement. I don't know if he actually said that, but I kind of have to agree. This is nowhere near as good as his performance in Sunset Boulevard. So if he actually said that, I think we are all in agreement with that. But once again, I want to thank Professor Dorkman for recommending this film. It's something that, as being a Billy Wilder film, that I definitely did want to see at some point. Stalag 17 is good, but I think it's better for the focus on who the snitch is and the mystery of that and the drama involving that than the comedy, which I think it focuses on a lot more. But even though I am going to give it a recommendation, I just didn't like the comedy all that much. But again, we have people who watched it and enjoyed it, so comedy is a very subjective thing, so that's up to you. But if you do like these types of films, you may enjoy Stalag 17, so give it a shot.
Gentlemen, please.
Remove your clothes. Or would you like us to do it for you?
Next is one of the most controversial films of 1999, and that is Eyes Wide Shut, starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And this was the final film directed by Stanley Kubrick. It has a Letterboxd score of 4.0 out of 5, a Rotten Tomatoes score of 76% fresh, and it did not win or get nominated for any Oscars at the time of its release. So before I get started, I just want to point out something. I am actually incredibly happy and proud of how the Letterboxd community is with people who have different opinions than the consensus, because I find myself with some reviews going, oh my god, I'm gonna get flamed. And that's never happened. So, bearing in mind, can we keep that same energy, please? Thank you. So anyway, let me get to the positives. I think visually the film is gorgeous. It's sumptuous. It feels like a cross-pollination between a Jacques Demy film and a Martin Scorsese film. It has that grittiness that you would expect from like a New York Scorsese film, but also has this like very vibrant color that is awash throughout the entire film as well, of blues and purples and reds. It was very evocative, and I really liked how the film looked. And the first half of the film runs pretty smoothly as like an Odyssey film of sorts. The main character going through different situations and seeing what happens and what what goes on. And I gotta say, the orgy scene, my God, is it unnerving. Oh my God, is it uncomfortable. If there is one scene in this film that makes me believe, oh yeah, this is a Kubrick film, it's this scene. Because it's just perfectly done. It not only looks great, it feels creepy, it feels unsettling, it's incredibly unnerving, but it's gorgeous, and the best part of it is, all of the scariest stuff is in my head. Really nothing on screen that is happening is all that scary, but it's just the thought of what could happen is just so unnerving that it just really made me uncomfortable. And I just have to point out that it was just an amazing scene that was so well constructed. Oh man, great scene. That said, and this is where I'm going to differ from a lot of people, I think the film falls apart after the orgy scene. I think the film overall is pretty messy, especially after that point. Bill's actions in the film seem kind of weird, almost unrealistic. I mean, he kind of feels like someone who's very naive, even though he is a doctor. I thought that's kind of strange, a bit. I also think it's weird how he acts in the second half of the film. I find it funny how he shows his medical license like it's a detective's badge. Like, yes, I'm Bill, I am a doctor, here's my card. I'm like, what? It's like, who the hell knows what a medical license card is? Like, what does that matter? And the paranoia after the orgy scene just falls completely flat. It feels forced in a way too. Just making it obvious that he is being followed just feels incredibly silly. And the cult aspect of the film that happens in the second half is pretty stale and trite. It just feels pretty obvious. Like, ooh, they're really quiet and creepy. They only communicate in notes. Oh boy, like, oh, and they're faceless and you don't want to know who they are because they're so powerful. Yeah, okay, I get it. Like, you could have done more with that. I was just watching the film throughout these scenes going, oh God, really? They went that route? Okay, sure. And honestly, I feel like I am treating this film more harshly because it's a Stanley Kubrick film, which is weird because I'm not exactly a Stanley Kubrick fan. I do like some of his films. I really like Barry Lyndon in 2001. I'm not such a fan of The Shining, but I do like Full Metal Jacket, and I do like The Clockwork Orange. I like him as a filmmaker, but knowing that he is so exacting, that he is so particular, and that he is so detailed to the most minute degree, that I find it really weird that this film feels so damn messy. I really sat here at the end of the film watching it and going, what was this about? There's so many threads that it's weaving that I don't think it threaded the needle quite well. In fact, I don't think the needle was there for it to thread. Now, I am not saying Eyes Wide Shut is a bad film. I think it's heavily flawed in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of things in this film that work, and I think the visuals and the way that the shots are framed are really well done. But by the time the second half rolls around after the orgy scene, I'm just sitting here going, okay, what is this movie about? And I can't quite grasp what it is. I've read some reviews on Letterboxd where people watch it once a year or watch it multiple times to get more out of it. And maybe that's what I need to do. But after the orgy scene and how perfect that was, I think the film just falls apart. So overall, I'm going to give Eyes Wide Shut 2.5 stars out of 5. Again, I think the visuals are fantastic. I think the way the shots are framed are really well done. Visually, I think the detail that Kubrick has in this film works in this film incredibly well. I cannot deny that. And the first half is done pretty well. Oh my God. And that orgy scene is just so well done. That scene alone is probably worth watching the film if you can stomach it. Because I gotta be honest with you, I was getting so unnerved at certain points of that scene where I was like, oh God, maybe I should stop for a few minutes. And I kind of did actually. So there's that. But I feel like the character of Bill is just a mess overall. And just the way that he acts is kind of unrealistic. And the cult aspects of the film too just seem pretty trite and forced. I did not feel any tension after the orgy scene. I was not unnerved or like, oh my God, what's about to happen? I was just rolling my eyes going, really? They're going this route with it? Okay, fine, sure. I think some of you might find my criticism pretty harsh of this film, but I think that's fair knowing exactly how Stanley Kubrick was and how detailed he was and how particular and persnickety he was and how long his shooting shooting was when it came to this film. It just feels like a mess of a film that was searching for something and couldn't find it. But for what it did do right, it did so well that I think it's worth watching just to see that. So overall, 2.5 stars out of 5 from me for Eyes Wide Shut. All right, let's get into the Letterboxd reviews. This one is from Stephen Clark. Stephen Clark gives it a heart, and he says, there's something that this film manages to capture about sex that I think is truly incredible. This film explores sex in such an individualistic, selfish thing to obtain. The characters in this film all refer to sex and treat sex as if it was something to take or to acquire. This film holds nothing back in its portrayal of that acquisition. I would say Bill would probably be the only person who doesn't, until a certain point in the film, I guess. There is a malice and a grimy tension in the way sex is stalked and desired here. Kubrick then turns the mirror on the elite and shows how at all levels, from a mere prostitute to a faceless top of our society, it's all the same. A shameful, exhilarating thing to procure. That's an interesting perspective from Stephen here. I can see where he's coming from with that, and I do kind of agree with that as well. So that's a very interesting perspective from Stephen there. Let's get into the next review. This one is from Cinema Bing Bong, and Cinema Bing Bong gives it 2 stars out of 5 with a heart. Okay. And Cinema Bing Bong says, this film was so boring, not even the boobs could save it. I can't say I was bored with Eyes Wide Shut, but I wouldn't also say this is a sexy film either, so the concept of boobs saving it would be kind of antithetical to the film, but I guess I see where Cinema Bing Bong is coming from here. This next review is from Robert. Robert gives it 1 star out of 5, and Robert says, didn't get it, neither did I. To be fair, what was this movie even about? My simplistic view of the plot: a couple in a long-term relationship have had thoughts about sleeping with other people, but don't actually do it. Groundbreaking! I think really the only person who's ever thought that in that relationship was Nicole Kidman, but I see your point there. I'm not a huge Kubrick fan, so I never really sought it out. You know, I am not either, but I do think some of his films are really good. I have yet to watch a Kubrick movie that made me think he was a master at his craft. Ooh, I thought I was being harsh. The movie could have been shorter by 40 minutes. Yeah, okay. The sex ritual thing was entirely too long. I disagree with that. I think that scene was perfectly done. Hearing this dude humming and chanting for 10 minutes was a bit much. I think that's what made it so unnerving. There has to be around 25 minutes of watching Cruise walk around. I don't think he's exaggerating either. He's probably right. Cruise's performance is fine, but no leading man could fix this aimless narrative. I don't think the narrative itself is aimless. I think the message it was trying to portray was aimless, is what I would think. I think the narrative itself makes coherent sense. I just don't understand what the point of that was. Like you said at the beginning of that, Robert. So there's my thought on that. And finally, we have KYK. KYK gives it 4 stars out of 5 with a heart. And KYK has a very interesting question to ask, and that is, what if Tom Cruise totally missed the vibe of the party and wore a scream mask to the orgy? Huh! That would be very Tom Cruise, as I would think. That would actually be funny. And when he talks to the Grandmaster of the orgy, he has the voice box. What is the password? Fidelio. But anyway, okay, back to the review. I might find myself watching Eyes Wide Shut again at some point, but I have to be honest, I was underwhelmed by the end and confused as to what the film was actually about. I think people have their theories, and that's fine, but I also find myself thinking that maybe that they give Kubrick a little too much credit for this movie because it's his final film. But on the other hand, some of you might think that I'm being a little too harsh on the film because it's a Kubrick film, and okay, I guess I could see that too, but overall, I was pretty underwhelmed by this film. And literally after the orgy scene, the film just tanks for me completely. It just kills its mood. It just kills the tension for me entirely of this film. And one last thing as well, okay? One last thing. Why show the mask on the pillow in Bill's bedroom with his wife before he enters the apartment? Why not show it as he's walking into the bedroom? Wouldn't that be a more tense and scary thing to show? That I did not get. I thought that was weird. But anyway, 2.5 stars out of 5 for me for Eyes Wide Shut. Again, you guys have been great before with my different opinions. Can we keep that energy up? Thank you.
There are many things you don't know about me, Miss Novak. As a matter of fact, there might be a lot we don't know about each other. You know, people seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth.
Well, I really wouldn't care to scratch your surface, Mr. Crowley, because I know exactly what I'd find.
And the final movie I'm reviewing for 2025 is the classic romantic comedy The Shop Around the Corner, starring Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart, directed by Ernst Lubitsch. It has a Letterboxd score of 4.2 out of 5, a Rotten Tomatoes score of 99% fresh, and it was not nominated for or won any Oscars at the time of its release. I was a little surprised by the Shop Around the Corner. It was a little bit slower than I really imagined it being, especially for something that's only about 95 to 100 minutes. But as the film does build up, it becomes very gratifying towards the end. I think the comedy is much better than the romance, but what really carries this film is the charm of the leads, which are Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart. What's interesting is the film gets funnier towards the middle and end when James Stewart realizes what's going on when it comes to the pen pal that he's obsessed with. And I think that was an interesting thing because I was thinking this was going to be more comedic than it really was. In fact, this film is surprisingly dark in some spots, but it's not overly so. I'm not going to spoil exactly the dark spots of the film, but there's one thing that happens to one character that seemed a little extreme for this type of movie, because this film is very sweet, it's very quaint, it's very simple in a way, and it's just like a romantic comedy charmer, and that's really all it is. But it has a very sweet and satisfying ending that I definitely did enjoy. It's a short and sweet movie, but it definitely is satisfying when the conclusion happens, and I think it's satisfying because the two leads really carry the film overall. So overall, I'm going to give The Shop Around the Corner 3.5 stars out of 5. I think it's a very good movie. The leads are what definitely carry this film. Both Sullivan and Stewart are very good. I do think it's a little slow from the first half of the film, but it does pick up and it gets much more charming and funny as the second half goes along. It's especially funny as well when they start insulting each other in certain parts of the movie. But what's interesting is that it's still believable even though they hate each other on the outside, but clearly love each other when it comes to the pen pal parts, like on the inside. This film has been remade a bunch of times. The last remake was You've Got Mail, which I just did not like. Again, I have an anti-Meg Ryan bias, so that might be why. But The Shop Around the Corner just stays with a certain theme, and it just is that. It doesn't do anything more complicated. It's just a sweet, quaint, romantic comedy that's just there to charm you. And when it sticks to that, it does very well. It does have some dark spots where I'm sitting there going, ew, that's a little much, but it doesn't really darken it too much, even though what happens is really dark. But overall, 3.5 out of 5 for me for The Shop Around the Corner. Alright, so let's get into the last Letterboxd reviews for 2025. This one is from Flowery Words. Flowery Words gives it 5 stars out of 5 with a heart, and they say, the way James Stewart speaks of matters in such a delicate and profound way always heals me. So gentle. I could listen to him go on about anything and everything endlessly. Oh, to be pen pals with him. This is the OG You've Got Mail. And Flowery Words quotes the one part of the scene where he says, people seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth. And then Flowery Words says, this quote alone expresses the soul and heart of the film. Moving on, the second review is from Raphael Mr. Movie Jovine. Mr. Movie gives it 3.5 stars out of 5 with a heart. And Mr. Movie says, the inherent charisma of James Stewart strikes again on this Ernst Lubitsch rom-com about a little shop somewhere in Budapest where two employees found love even though they claim to despise themselves. Yeah, the charisma of James Stewart really holds this film up, I would say. Once again, Lubitsch's snappy and often quirky dialogues make for a really good time and some really good laughs, especially by William Tracy's small appearance, who makes for some of the biggest laughs. The chemistry between Stewart and Sullivan makes also for some really sweet and lovely moments as they pretty much invent the modern love-hate relationships that are so present in these types of movies today. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. If this did not work, a lot of the films I think people think are classics today, like 10 Things I Hate About You, wouldn't work as well if it wasn't for this movie. I would agree with that. All in all, while To Be or Not to Be still reigns supreme as my fave film out of the Lubitsch filmography, that is a great film, by the way, this is still a nice entry and another example of why he was one of the best. Yeah, I definitely think the chemistry between Stewart and Sullivan is what makes this film work really well. It's really funny because even when they are sniping at each other, they're still very charming and still really cute. It never feels malicious in a way. Like, the insults aren't, like, really nasty. And I think that really helps. But both of them are very charming in the film, and I do agree with Mr. Movie. That I think that's what carries this film overall. This next review is from Elena. Elena gives it 4 stars out of 5, and Elena says, the Shop Around the Corner uses deceptively simple direction to reveal character dynamics with remarkable precision. That is true. The direction is very simple, but it does do a very good job of showing the character dynamics. I agree with that. Lubitsch arranges actors to tight symmetrical compositions within the cramped shop using spatial distance and the lack of it to underline emotional tension. The careful choreography of movement around counters and displays turns everyday detail interactions into visual storytelling. That is a good point. The way that the shop is constructed and how everything is centered along really does add attention to the film that I actually didn't think about until Elena mentioned that. Absolutely. Camera work is understated but purposeful. Gentle dolly moves and restrained close-up highlight shifts in intimacy without breaking the film's naturalistic flow. That is also true. She's got a lot of good points. The result is a visually economical yet richly expressive romantic comedy where every placement and gesture quietly shapes the unfolding relationships. Christmas movies from the 1940s really can't be beat. Happy holidays. Yeah, I am finding myself really enjoying the Christmas movies from the past more than I am from the present. But Elena has a lot of good points here that I really did not think about. The way that the set is constructed, the way that everything moves, the way the camera is placed during certain scenes. I absolutely agree with Elena. She has a lot of good points. Absolutely. And finally, our last review is from Phoebe. Phoebe gives it 4.5 stars out of 5 with a heart. And Phoebe says, this is the dream Christmas romance. I mean, this movie was a very lovely film. At times, I kind of forgot it was a Christmas movie, but they kind of hammered home in the end that it is a Christmas movie, so there's that. You know, it's one thing I kind of forgot about as well. I forgot this was set in Budapest. When they kept mentioning that it was in Budapest, I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's right. Because it didn't really feel like it was in Budapest. It felt like it could have been in any American city. But yeah, that was interesting. But overall, I definitely enjoyed The Shop Around the Corner. It's a sweet film. And it relies on the charisma of Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart to carry it. And they carried it very well. I'm kind of glad this was the last movie that I actually watched for the year. Eyes Wide Shut was going to be the one that I was going to say that's where I'm going to end it on. And I'm kind of glad I didn't do that because I would have been pretty disappointed. But this is a very sweet film. And if you're looking for a Christmas movie that maybe you haven't seen, I think this might be a good one to check out. So definitely check out The Shop Around the Corner if you are interested. And that is it for this episode of Watch, Rate, Heart. And I want to thank everyone for a great year. This channel made big changes this year, but we also grew the channel past 1,000 subs, which honestly, I would have never expected to happen when starting this channel a few years ago. I'd also like to thank all the Letterboxd reviewers who I've highlighted in each episode. Thank you for your thoughtful opinions, funny anecdotes, and just overall love of films, and having your opinions on these videos. I'm going to take the rest of December off for the holidays, but I will also have one last video released during the break, and that is my best first watches of 2025 video. So look forward to that when that comes out. And I will be returning on January 9th, 2026, and I'll even tell you what the first episode will be. And it'll be films from 1996. That's right. I'm running it back. I'll be watching and reviewing films from 30 years ago to see what has stood the test of time and what has been forgotten but should be unearthed in 2026. So look forward to that when it releases. If you liked any of the reviewers I've highlighted in this episode, you can check the video description for a link to their Letterboxd profiles, and be sure to give them a follow and let them know that Brad from Watch Rate Heart sent you. You can follow me at Letterboxd and X at Watch Rate Heart. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. I am Brad from Watch Rate Heart. Thank you for watching, and remember, we all watch and rate movies, but you give them the heart that makes them live forever. Have a good holiday, have a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year, everybody.